if there's like a different article that we've come across or kind of used in our own education, right? Because we've had to learn about all these things. Like there is no one resource or no one place to learn about the church year very well, which was kind of the exigence or like importance for our project, as I mentioned, because when we first got started with this, we're like, where do you even go? I mean, I don't know how to learn this stuff. Like, how do I recover these traditions and customs that have been forgotten? Like, surely someone knows, but it's not like they're written down in one little handy, like, this is how you are, this is how to be a Lutheran sort of guidebook. And then we were so reassured when we started to talk to people and heard that that was their experience too. They're like, I've been looking for, information like this for such a long time. And so, part of our process has been going to these books, looking up sermons that different pastors have written about the different days of the year, utilizing a lot of these great resources put out by Synod and trying to just put it into one place.
Welcome back to On the Line. Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Kristen Einertson. She's both a professor of rhetoric at University of St. Thomas and also the co-founder of All the Household, which we'll talk about in depth in this episode, which basically helps support families create healthy habits within the household, particularly based on the liturgy and the Lutheran Christian faith. This is a very enjoyable conversation. She's a professor of rhetoric, so she's very articulate in all the subjects that we talk about. I hope that you enjoy it as much as I did. As always, if you can like this video, if you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, this helps this message get out. And also, we thank you very much for doing this in the past. It's very much helped support our progress throughout this first year. Thank you. Enjoy and God bless. Breakdown in rhetoric. Are we live, by the way?
We are live. Okay. So Bennett says we're live. Dr. Kristen Einertson.
Yes.
Yes. We're very excited to have you on.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
So we are going to talk about what's the website called?
All the Household.
All the Household. So it's going to be kind of habits in the household, some different liturgical flares for that, different habits to build up in your household. Very excited to dive into that. I think that there's a lot of valuable resources for moms, for families on how to not only raise kids. I mean, that's a big component of it, but even if you don't have kids, just things to do in the household that represent and kind of solidify your own Christian faith.
Yes,
right.
Sure.
So we're going to get to that, but we're kind of talking about, and we've been kind of leading into this for a while. I don't know when Bennett pushed record, but leading into you've got a doctorate's degree in rhetoric, which is really interesting. So that's what we're kind of talking about here. So what does the breakdown in rhetoric? Maybe you could even explain what that means. How does that impact the church and even society?
Yeah, for sure. So rhetoric, kind of my area of study, maybe seems like a complex term or something that not everyone is experienced with or feels like was part of their own education. Just as the study, the art of persuasion, influence, the way that meanings from language unfold and the impact that they have on individuals and society, whether that's, creating identity or bringing people into community with one another, generating the reality in which we live. And so that's kind of what I study and what my discipline is all about. But of course, there's lots of different ways to apply that to our life and context. And yeah, when you think about life in the church or just the way that we're in conversation with one another, a big part of it is the conversations that we have, the dialogues that we have. How do we come to the positions that we hold? How do we understand like certain identities or like really substantial parts of our being? How is that different and similar to the other people around us?
Because it seems like in the church, in the Lutheran church, and I mean, every other body is going to have this, right? There's a certain spectrum of the way that, if we take like the LCMS, the way that our beliefs are then practiced, right? And there's always that need for conversation to say, okay, how far is too far in one direction or the other? What kind of thing, where do we have adiaphora or the ability to kind of express these things in different ways? Where do we go too far? And we were talking earlier about one of the issues seems to be that there's not a willingness, maybe that's new, maybe it's not, I don't know. There's not a willingness to be able to say, well, what is that objective truth that gives us some kind of guidelines for how subjectively these things are going to be expressed? Like, there's not a conversation to be able to have that. It seems like lots of times people just do the things they do and they just kind of justify it in their own corners, but they're not willing to have that conversation to say, yeah, we really want to get to that objective truth. We want to use rhetoric and discussion and dialogue to understand that. And then maybe be willing to be able to say, hey, maybe I'm 20% off and I need to correct that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that push and pull, like that tension that you're kind of saying exists, is healthy. I mean, I think that that's going to exist at any sort of community or place where there is a shared identity. And that's something that rhetoric kind of champions, right? Because that's like where the good stuff actually happens, is that conversation and that ability to like further understand oneself and other people's position through that conversation that's being had. But when there's not even a willingness to engage in the conversation in the first place, as you were just saying, like that becomes really problematic, because then how are we ever supposed to deliberate and kind of come to that shared understanding when it's just one person in their corner, another person in theirs, and we don't even have the ability or the format or place to be able to come together and say, okay, let's really hash this out, or let's enjoy the process of talking to one another. It shouldn't be contentious, right? Like it shouldn't necessarily be scary or something that we don't want to have with one another. I think when we think about debate or when we think about having an argument, that's like often the first thing that comes to mind, or maybe even an assumption about someone like me that studies rhetoric, that I'm just interested in kind of those points of conflict. But that's
kind of debate for the sake of debate. Like how many angels, can dance on the tip of a sword or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thinking about like the scholastics or whatever. And, even in our current context, or perhaps like living in Minnesota, there's even kind of a resistance to that, where why should we actually be truthful and upfront with someone, with what we say and mean, when those conversations can be had through other means, such as, kind of the Minnesota nice attitude, or kind of fear to actually speak up about what you believe. But again, by articulating those positions and becoming more comfortable in what you actually feel and, adhere to in terms of your positions is going to be important, because then that allows your neighbor to, actually know where you're at with things, and for you to have that discussion with them regarding your own thoughts.
I would say that probably that's one of the best skills I think I've learned. And I don't know when I would have learned it, but when I look back over like the last 10 years or so, maybe a little longer, I guess, when I first entered SEM, right to now, there's been so many different topics that I have been persuaded to, change, right? And I'm appreciative of that, right? And now I've kind of got that mindset where I'm just very open to it, I think, to where I'm like, prove me wrong and I'll change my mind. And there's so many, we've talked about classical education on this. I had people at seminary kind of advocating for classical education. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, I was like, I'm not interested. Like, good for you. Like, that's something you're interested in. Like, good for you. I like the Detroit Lions. You like classical education. Like, good for us. Like, we have our hobbies, right?
For sure.
And it took I'd say probably 4 years of continual data points. And then all of a sudden it switched, right? And for anyone that's watched this channel, like, that's something I'm passionate about, not as a subjective Brian Stecker, like, this is a cool hobby of mine, but like, I think there's something objective here, right? And it's not one size fits all. I know you've got certain thoughts on like different ways that it can be expressed, and there's, good and bad there, but yeah, I was converted on that. I've been converted on a bunch of things, even since this podcast has started, right? So we're like 1 year into this, and I've had numerous things where I'm talking to someone, I'm like, oh boy, you're right. Like, you're right. And I haven't thought about that. And I thought I had thought about it, but I hadn't. You're actually bringing forth data points that I had kind of ignored or not taken the time to look at. So the importance of rhetoric and dialogue, if people are open to that, right, and for actually searching after truth, it's needed for the church, but it's needed for individual lives, or else you're going to be, I would have been stuck at my viewpoints at 24 if I would have just kind of like dug my heels in. But I pray to God I'm not stuck with my like 33-year-old viewpoints. I hope I'm, sharper at 43 and 53.
For sure. It's always a process of personal refinement, and again, kind of where you fit into the broad spectrum that exists. And it's such a beautiful process, right? Like, I love it for the exact reasons that you just articulated. If you can change my mind about something like that, great. I couldn't ever want anything more, other than to feel like I was taken from one position that I had and kind of moved along the line because of, evidence that was presented to me, or the way that someone brought their position forward, or kind of the accumulation of different thoughts and ideas over a long period of time, which we know is super important to the rhetorical process, as you were just saying too, in terms of classical education. But you have to be open to that. You have to be kind of willing and open-minded, have that critical thinking skill set to be able to actually encounter the world in that way. And I think that that's just a huge thing that's been lost in our educational system. And one of the reasons that it's a shame that rhetoric isn't a part of our learning process, until oftentimes college, if that's even when someone encounters it.
So if you could give us, and we're not going to do the whole episode on rhetoric, although we could, right? I mean, we could probably do a whole series, but if you could give us, or for the listener that's saying, okay, maybe I've heard the word rhetoric, maybe I haven't, maybe I've got, young kids or middle school kids or whatever, like what are some just main components of rhetoric that are important for us to have our minds wrapped around? Like, what are some of the important tenets?
Sure. I mean, like I said before, obviously the idea that persuasion and influence occurs, but it's not just the process of persuasion and influence through public speaking, which I think is what a lot of people assume, right? And this is maybe one of the critiques, if you will, of classical education, or the way that we kind of focus on rhetoric within the few places where it's actually taught and really highlighted, is it's not just about the speeches of Abraham Lincoln. It's not just about learning how to memorize, the perfect 5-paragraph essay and kind of use that to back up whatever point you want to make. It's so much more. It's looking at the texts around you in the whole world, the way that we use language in a variety of capacities to try to promote messages and meaning, the way that meaning is articulated through those different avenues, whether they're intended or not, right? How you can read into a situation, even if that's not what the initial creator kind of had in mind when they put it out there. And so, when we think about rhetoric and just components, obviously it starts with like the originator, the speaker, the person that's creating the rhetorical artifact or object that you're looking at. But it's a huge part of it, is a huge component of it is the audience too, right? How the other person is receiving that message and kind of what their buy-in into the process is, how well they can be persuaded or urged to care about a certain topic, which, going back to like dialogues within the synod or other religious avenues, could be one of the issues that comes up, right? Is someone like even willing in the first place to hear someone else out and being able to engage. But then, of course, a lot of it is context too. What other factors go into the situation to kind of create the moment in which someone is primed and ready, or not primed and ready, to actually hear what's happening.
How do you train yourself to be a good listener?
Oh, it's so hard, right? This is like one of the most difficult things, is active listening and really paying attention to what someone is saying and kind of putting away everything that bubbles up inside of you in a moment, whether it's, outside factors like the door shutting or an alarm going off, all the way to just how you feel about a certain topic, or like the baggage that you bring along with you to any sort of situation. I mean, you have to constantly kind of push that down and put it at bay to really prioritize who's sitting in front of you and the person that you're trying to create that relationship with.
So one step is to kind of know yourself and know, like, what kind of presuppositions do I have? What kind of triggers do I have? What kind of maybe boxes do I have around a certain idea? Right. So that therefore, when you're speaking, I don't immediately like put you into this box and be like, oh, she's one of those people. Right. And then I just kind of read what you're saying through that preconceived lens, or like you're saying something and like, oh, like that's a trigger of mine. So now I'm going to like argue against you rather than listening to you. So is it kind of that, like, you got to kind of know where you're coming from and then put that at bay and then just be charitable and listen to the other person for what they're saying?
Yeah, for sure. I think the charity is a huge aspect of it. And I think also just knowing that someone can always surprise you, right? Like, we always try to put people into boxes, as you're saying, and we try to like, think about the argument before it even happens. Oh, we know what those talking points are. We know where this is going. But how wonderful is it, again, just like the process when your mind is changed about something, that someone can say something that is completely different than what you were initially thinking. And then that moment of spontaneity, that moment of like waking up, is enough to kind of make you jump out of that, position that you were in as a listener and actually pay attention and be invested enough to hear what is going on.
It seems like another part of it is just, and you've advocated for this, but just having the actual conversation. Yes. There's so many times where like something will, with somebody, something will like rub a certain way. And then I'll be at home stewing about it, and I'll be creating a narrative about the other person, or like trying to articulate their viewpoint in a straw man type way. And then eventually the time comes, and it should happen usually earlier, but then there's an actual dialogue and you're like, oh, like that's way more reasonable than the way that I was articulating it last night as I was stewing. All right. So part of it's just like, stop stewing and stop like creating, a devil type narrative for the other person, and just go actually have that dialogue. And usually you find out they're much more reasonable.
Oh, for sure. Right. And you're actually talking to a real person, right? Like you can have a dialogue, a conversation with yourself, of course, but like having it in your mind is nowhere near as fun as it is having it in person. Yeah. And actually being able to see the real person behind the argument and the idea and the message that's being portrayed, and understand where they're coming from, and understand kind of what preconceived notions or conditions has brought them to their place, just like it's brought you to your own place too.
Very good. Okay. So with that in mind, I want to jump, just because I want to make sure we spend enough time on kind of our main topic here. But I do think there's some crossover, right? Because I think the point is, what you're going to be talking about here you're going to make some pitches on things that are healthy. And I've listened to you talk about this before, and you'll kind of say, like, there's different ways that this manifests. Like the way it takes place in the Einertson household might look different than the Stecker household or the Stanfield household or whatever, right? But there's some certain things that you're going to say, these are actually objectively good or objectively beautiful things to have in your household, right? So for those that are listening, like, right, keep that in mind, that you're pitching something objective, and it might have some subjective qualities in your house, but you're saying, these are things that we should take seriously. This is not, right, this is not just Kristen Einertson's personal hobby that she wants to share with you. Is that fair?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And when it comes to ideas of liturgical living, or kind of the way that looks in a Lutheran sphere particularly, which is very unique, right? It's different from other areas in which we might find this interest or kind of historic legacy or whatever. There really should be some end goal and some reason that we're engaging in it in the first place. There should be some idea that by doing things in the sphere, it does create identity, it does create community, it does continue to build up the foundation of things that we, care about a lot and find to be truthful, to be important, to be virtuous. And that can be one of the difficulties with kind of the way that we have strayed away from these things in the past, or perhaps forgotten them as part of the church, or part of a Christian life, or part of just being a person that's able to engage in conversation, is that these are not foreign to us. Like, this isn't something that has never been part of the life of someone in the church. It's just that we've forgotten it, or we've, not been invested in that for a while now.
Mm-hmm. So you've got the PhD in rhetoric. So you tell me if there's a better way to go about this. But the kind of the way I think is, like, if you can kind of explain what it is you're advocating for, and then maybe we can then move on to just, you've given good explanations before on just the importance of the liturgy, which is going to be a backdrop of this, right? So, and then kind of third, then we can get into kind of like Q&A on some of the details, of some of the different things you explain, like on your website. Is that a good way to go about it, or would you rather go about it in a different way?
No, that sounds great.
Okay. So yeah, go ahead. If you can just kind of articulate what it is you're advocating for, and what the kind of the purpose of your website, which your website is called?
allthehousehold.com.
Allthehousehold.com, which, Bennett, can you pull that up like in the corner as she's kind of explaining? Maybe not. After. Okay, sounds good. So yeah, so All the Household, you've got a website. You're going to be writing in monthly articles in, what is it?
The Lutheran Witness.
In the Lutheran Witness coming up, right? So this is getting some steam, like what you're talking about, in a really good way. So what is it? What are you advocating for?
Yeah, for sure. So this project of ours, I will say, has been going on for a couple of years now. And it really started when I was newly married. And my friend and I, Tessa Mensch, who, runs the project with me, she is part and parcel of everything that you see go on. We were both really interested in trying to learn more about what it means to live out a Lutheran identity in our households, in our environments, in our lives that don't just happen on Sunday morning, right? Or the times that we're in the church. And part of our investment in this, of course, was knowing that we would be raising families soon. We both had little kids when we started this. And so it was very much like at the very beginning of motherhood for us, and kind of our new identity as wives and moms, and of course, having husbands that were going to be pastors one day. But we found a lot of information online. You would look up how to celebrate Pentecost, in the home, or what can I do besides just going to church, that actually tries to mark this as like a significant component of my day, my year, the habits that I have established. And you would find so many resources from the Catholic world, the Orthodox world, perhaps the Anglicans, if you're really lucky, for major days like this or whatever. And it was all really useful information, but of course it wasn't created from a Lutheran theological viewpoint. It wasn't kind of created with that understanding in mind. And so all of a sudden we started to think, why aren't we part of this conversation? Why aren't Lutherans represented in this world? I mean, we've been around for a long time. Like, we're certainly important to these sorts of dialogues, but there just wasn't a lot out there. And so kind of with further interrogation and looking at resources and stuff like that, we realized that a lot of these things really were part of the identity of just the church, right? Just the church as a whole. And we're certainly part of things from a Lutheran identity or viewpoint too, but had been forgotten over time, or just hadn't been passed down over the years, or given any real meaning, if they were taught in certain times and places and stuff like that. And so our goal was really just try to resurrect some of those customs, understandings of things, being able to produce content that kind of looked at Lutheran liturgical living, and being able to promote it, like you said, for the use in households, obviously with children, which was kind of our personal buy-in. But since, has had such a great connection to many people in the church, whether it's schools that are looking to implement this as part of their curriculum, churches that are hoping to have this be like supplemental education to, again, what's just happening during the primary services of the week and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that we do, everything that we talk about on our blog, but also the other venues that we have been a part of now, has just been trying to encourage kind of the flourishing of this Lutheran liturgical life and encouraging people to be able to live out parts of the church year and other aspects of their vocations and identities that aren't just them going to church.
It seems important for two ways. And actually, let me just say something right off the bat, right? This is one of the areas where I think I'm going to be, and I've looked into your stuff, so that process has already begun, but where I'm going to be converted or convinced of something. We do not do this in our household. Mm-hmm. I mean, in small ways we might do it, but nothing to the degree of what you're going to be putting forward here. So I'm very intrigued to learn more, because these are some changes that we want to make. And my wife and I were talking about this last night of like, she's like, don't come home with a whole system right off the bat. I'm like, no, I understand. And like, so we'll talk through and figure out how it works out in the Stecker household. But as I was thinking about it, right, so you're saying kind of two things. One, there's something that takes place on Sunday. And how does that not just happen on Sunday? How does that become part of your life? How does that become kind of a capstone of something that is part of your regular habits, right? Because if it's just Sunday, then you're really training your life to operate in a way that's separate from Sunday if you don't carry Sunday home, right? So that seems to be like one component. And then two, I'm very interested in like the seasonal aspect, right? Because especially with kids now, I think Christmas was really important. For us, the Christmas season always seems to be before Christmas because you get the trees up and everything like that, right? But as a kid, like that was always a magical time. Then I got into like my 20s, and like I wanted it to be, but like just naturally, like you're just living with guys in Indianapolis, and like we're not doing traditions, there. Then we get kids and we get a household, and we're like, oh yeah, like this is a really kind of, you want to bring that into your household so that kids can experience like the difference. There's something different going on in the year here, and it seems like having those seasons is very beneficial for kids and for parents, but just like that's a very lively way to live rather than every single day looking the exact same. Are those fair points?
Yeah, for sure. I think with the second one there, I mean, the whole point of it really is for education, right? It's all just a tool that's supposed to be utilized to help teach and learn more about life in Christ. I mean, it all points towards God. And that's kind of the first important like Lutheran identity aspect of it to keep in mind, is that it's always directed towards the cross. Like everything that we do is supposed to be in the service of seeing Jesus and God as the center of our year, the center of our time, the center of how we spend, every waking aspect of our life, not just on church on Sundays, as mentioned. But with kids, that the way that we implement that is a cyclical nature and kind of creating that patterns is so important for them, because they don't have a concept of time. Have you ever like asked a 2-year-old, what yesterday means or the word tomorrow or something like that? They have no idea. But if you start to create kind of this understanding of this is what life as a Christian looks like, we do certain things at certain times of the year. The colors that the church is vested in on Sunday actually mean something more than just, the altar guild, getting out different paraments to put up and stuff like that. It all works together. It's all been something that the church has created in a very useful way over so many years for the purpose of this educational reason. And again, it's not just something to be dismissed, right? Like the work and effort and thought that's put into the creation of those things shouldn't just be forgotten or kind of tossed to the side. There is an objective importance to it.
So you're saying like these are teaching tools, and especially I'm thinking for kids, like we had St. Michael the Archangel. Sunday was last Sunday, I think. Yeah, last Sunday, right? So we were in white, right? But people recognize that, right? So they go, okay, something's different, white, why? And then if you can kind of articulate that, then they can connect that importance to, whereas if I just gave like an introduction of like, here's St. Michael, and I just kind of give an explanation that just engages the mind, then that might be forgotten. But if you attach it to something visual and, some of these other aspects, liturgical aspects, then it becomes a little bit more rooted. You understand like, okay, there was something different going on here. This is why, this is how it contributes to the story of salvation in the biblical narrative.
Exactly. And it's supposed to involve the whole body and mind, right? All of these customs, traditions, the things that the church has propped up. It's not just about thinking through something intellectually. It's about learning it and having it ingrained in your heart and your soul in the way that really makes that faith formative for someone, and especially for a little kid. Like, that's how faith is formed, right? Is in those experiences. And, St. Michael is such a wonderful example, especially because that's such a great feast, and it landed on a Sunday this year, which we're so fortunate that we all got to experience that kind of together in a collective corporate fellowship. But thinking about the other tie-ins that day has to the Christian message, right? Like themes of the end time, since we're kind of like starting to progress towards the end of the church year now, and matters of life and death, and the things that we learn about angels and celestial beings, and kind of, the way that our earthly existence, is tied into so much more within the Christian narrative and things like that too. And so it's a wonderful day to be able to teach about those things, but then also make it really tangible for children, because, when you pull out the colors for church on Sunday, in our family, we made a blackberry cobbler, which is a tradition associated with St. Michael, and has a great story tie-in. You have an opportunity to then explain the story and teach about it, and your kids maybe remember that a little bit better than someone just saying, St. Michael's Day, or not even knowing who St. Michael is, which in some areas is certainly the case, if you haven't been familiar or grown up in a place that really cares about the church year.
Which is a good example of, if you don't know about St. Michael, which I would say growing up, I didn't know about St. Michael.
No, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, not that long ago. And that's at least, that shows that that's a symptom of something's amiss, right? Because that shouldn't be the case, right? If we are teaching the whole collection of what the Christian doctrine is, like St. Michael's going to be part of that, which is why there's a feast day to him, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I mean, that's again, one small example, but that could be said about so many of the days on the church's calendar, and kind of these things that otherwise would just land by the wayside because we're not in church on that particular day. And so why would you ever care to commemorate it or remember it?
Like Epiphany, which was, was one of the biggest holidays, bigger than Christmas in the early church, from what I've been told.
For sure.
Maybe Christian could correct me on that, but.
Yeah, no, exactly. Epiphany. And, kind of looking at the way that it connects to Christmas and falls after the Christmas season, we have this wonderful tie-in to Epiphany right away. And then that goes all the way to Candlemas in February. And many people don't even know what that is, right? The purification of Mary, etc. And so how can we better teach these things and have it actually be part of the Christian identity, which we have received? But so many of us, maybe didn't have that same appreciation growing up and are looking to make a difference in the ways that our own children are educated. So
a lot to unpack there. Let's do two kind of quick things, though. First, can you walk me through what a week might look like? Let's take Epiphany. Is that a good example to use? Like, what would a week in Epiphany look like at the Einertson household?
Sure.
Okay. And then maybe we can jump back and do a little bit more of a deep dive into just like, what is liturgy and the importance of liturgy?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's a week look like?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about kind of the priorities of liturgical living, if you will, like at its center, of course, again, is Christ and the Word of God, and certainly should be going to church. And so if there's ever like one recommendation, I have, or when people are like, oh, I want to get started into this more, like, as you're saying, with your own household and things like this, like going to church, like, right, that's all you need. Like, that's really the gateway into everything, is being able to prioritize that. But again, you have to look for opportunities, because sometimes there's not always a way to go to church on this particular day that you're looking to commemorate and, celebrate or whatever. So of course, saying prayers at home can be a wonderful way into that. We have the Treasury of Daily Prayer, which offers, readings and suggestions for the commemorations right in there in, complete pattern with the church year, which is great. There's so many other wonderful resources like that that have been put out by the Synod as well. So that's the first thing to keep in mind, is like service and then prayer as well. But then in terms of Epiphany, if I'm thinking of that particular example, like one of the favorite things that we do in our family is have a huge 12th night party, right? Which is celebrating the 12th night of Christmas, the very end of Christmas, and the start of Epiphany. And so it's kind of this natural transition of, we're no longer just focused on only the nativity of Christ and Jesus being born, but moving into the story of the wise men coming and the start of Jesus being revealed to the world, and all of these other good themes that we have throughout this season. And so with that party that we throw, we, celebrate all these customs and traditions that, again, have been part of the church for such a long time. So there's making of a king cake, which is a certain type of pastry that, has all of the symbolism attached. And historically, you hide a little baby Jesus inside for Jesus to be found by the person that eats the piece of cake, right? Which connects into the idea of Epiphany and the finding of Jesus by the wise men and stuff like that too. We sing songs. There's so many wonderful Epiphany hymns, right? Way more than what you could ever sing in a single service on Sunday, let alone just the Sundays of the year that fall in that season. And so singing hymns at home is a great way to kind of celebrate and live into certain seasons of the church year and really develop that appreciation and that flavor for what the different language is, what the different feelings and values kind of associated with each part of the season might be. We say, of course, the prayers that are laid out for Epiphany that you can find in the LSB or that others have written. And of course, there's prayers for all of these different days. We publish them on our blog, so you can find access to them there. But it's great because they're Lutheran prayers. They're not prayers to a saint. They're not prayers that kind of mistake the real meaning for the day. They're prayers that, of course, center life around Jesus again. And so being able to do that, and then finally just being able to celebrate with friends and live into that Christian identity together. Say, this is something that we all do together. This isn't just for the Einertsons because we're a pastor's family and we're weird. Yeah. This is something that really any Christian can do and should do and has always done. And I think that that's always one of the most encouraging things for me when I'm partaking in some of these traditions and customs, is thinking how that connects me to the lives of Christians that have gone before me for centuries, right? When I say these prayers, when I sing these hymns, when I do these things, isn't just me doing it or me teaching my kids how to do it. It's me doing it in fellowship, quite literally with the saints that have gone before me and those that will come after me too. And I'm just one small piece of that huge Christian story that's occurring.
One of the things that stands out to me there is every family. Okay, so I'll just use my family. I think we like the idea of traditions, and we kind of search for traditions, right? And there's certain times of the year, like Christmas, for instance, where we're like, okay, we're kind of like looking into well, what other things can we do to make, this special for the kids? And sometimes we're just kind of sometimes we'll make things up as we go, or we'll just kind of look to random sources and be like, oh, that's kind of cool, like Elf on a Shelf. And then we're like, oh, is that good or not? Right? So you just kind of go to these random places, but everyone wants traditions, right? And there's other times of the year where we don't have traditions and we're kind of looking for special events. So we're like, okay, we got a weekend here, what do we do? I don't know, let's take the kids to the zoo, right? And nothing wrong with that. But we're always searching for things to get the kids excited for a Friday or for something coming up in 2 weeks, right? And we kind of artificially create that. So I think all families are really looking for traditions. And you're basically saying there's a lot of these traditions that have been tried and tested that actually articulate the Christian faith, would be very exciting for kids. And you can just plug and play to some degree that right into you, and you'll get that. You'll get those exciting events for the kids. You'll be able to also attach it to the Christian faith. Is that part of this too? Is it just this is what every family wants and it's already there and we've forgotten about it?
I think that's totally part of it. I think another part of it is that it's what families already do, right? It's not just that your family is looking for traditions or another family is seeking it out. We all have traditions that we already partake in, whether you think they're special or not. If you make pancakes on a Saturday morning, that's a tradition. If you watch the Super Bowl every year, that's a tradition. If you go to grandma's house on Thanksgiving, that's a tradition. We already embark and partake in all of these habitual sorts of actions, thoughts, messages, etc., throughout our daily lives, whether we intentionally think about it being that way or not. And that ingrains itself on your kids, right? The things that your kids do as an adult is directly related to what they were given when they grew up, which is why one of the best things that you can give your kids as parents is good habits, and teach your kids, the intention behind the things that they do and really being clear about those messages. And so it's not just that these things provide an avenue into the families that are looking for that or want it. It tries to provide an answer for the fact that we already all live into the traditions of our daily lives. And this is, the Christian way that those traditions are shaped, and kind of gives you, a natural avenue into putting your life out there in a way that mirrors the life of the church year, because we already, have a calendar that we all live by, whether it's going to your kids' sports practices on Tuesday night, or whatever else it might be. We all have to order our lives around time and the existence of the year. And we're just so lucky that God thought through those things for us, right? The church made itself to work with that existing pattern that's already there.
And Israel did that too. I mean, this is something that's as old as humanity, these kind of traditions. And I remember, two things. I remember I was in Kenya, and we go to the Maasai for a little bit. So they're kind of there by the Maasai Mara, which goes into Tanzania, whatever the Sahara on that side is. But anyway, I was talking with one of the Maasai kind of tribal leaders, or he's kind of a warrior. And I was like, what's your perspective on American culture? And he goes, you don't have a culture. And he was like really abrupt about it. And he was kind of right? Because he was talking about like all these different things that they do. And they've got that. And they weren't, I don't think they were a Christian tribe, so they weren't doing the same things, but they have their traditions, their daily, their weekly habits, their yearly kind of flows that goes with the seasons and all of this. And he was looking at us. He's like, what kind of American traditions do you have? Like, you're just a hodgepodge of random things. And I was like, yeah, like my ancestors are German. And my grandparents were kind of the last vestige of that, where like they would have all these different traditions throughout the year that were kind of German culture. And there was some overlap with like Lutheran Christian as well. I don't know to what degree. But then I look at like the following generations, and certainly our generation, and we just lose those traditions. We just kind of go through the sports year, and we just kind of follow kids' sports, and that becomes our tradition. But that's not a real culture. That's just doing things or just filling your schedule with events.
Yeah, I mean, it's accidental, right? We fall into the patterns that are kind of laid before us without much thought. We just do what the neighbors do because that's what they do, or we do, again, what we were taught growing up because that's kind of our only knowledge of what could be out there. But I think the liturgical living world just opens up so many possibilities for that and really shows how important that intention can be. I think back to your comment about like no American culture. I mean, I definitely do think we have a very cultured American existence. And I actually teach that in my classes too, is like trying to develop what an understanding of American culture is. Cause I think a lot of people think that, but we actually have such a distinct American culture. If you think about like sports, if you think about the way that kind of all of that conglomerate has come together here in this country.
Is it based on entertainment?
I mean, it can be based on a whole bunch of things, right? Like it's not just one thing that creates our culture here in the US. It's the coming together of so many of those different aspects and kind of the different way that appears here than it does in like Germany or a place that maybe has a more homogenous identity or thing like that. But of course, that's changing in a lot of parts of the world too, right? As I've also been to Tanzania and spent time with the Maasai. And, for them, like the answer to a lot of that too is that changes will come their way as well, right? We are all part of this globalized world where like we can no longer just divorce ourselves from the neighbors living beside us or whatever. But that then only undergirds the importance of having our own identity really solidified. Otherwise, you are going to fall into these other things that are happening. And what does the church year provide? It provides so many learning opportunities then through those things, because like when you create, the blackberry cobbler on Michaelmas, or you make Lucia Cotter, the St. Lucia Day buns in July or in December for her day, like you think about what that teaches. Obviously, it teaches, about that particular person and kind of how their life fits into the rest of the church year and stuff. But like you think about the St. Lucia's Day, like what do you do with the Lucia Cotter when you make it? You put 2 raisins in either side of like the little pastry. And, it gives it a distinct look. Like I always saw depictions of it growing up, but I never really understood what the point of that was. But then, learning more about this, you realize that those 2 raisins represent eyes. Why is that important for St. Lucia? Because she was martyred with her eyes being gouged out, right? And so you eat that pastry, a little 5-year-old eats that pastry. Do they know that that's actually what the connection was? Or like I made these for our church last year, since St. Lucia's Day fell on a Wednesday when we had our Advent service. And people were kind of horrified. They're like, why are we, commemorating this? Why is this something that's hailed up as being a good thing? And it's like, no, this is beneficial to learn about in the context of the church, because we learn about like the pain and sorrow that goes into being a Christian, but also how that person lived a life of faith and ultimately went to go to live with God in heaven. Like what better day could you celebrate than someone's baptism into heaven, which is what a saint's day is the day that they died and that they went to go be with our Lord. And so like being able to live into that and teach our kids about that is such a beautiful thing and has so much meaning and deep layers and texture to it and stuff that like, is so much more important than just going to a sports game on a Saturday.
Yeah, I think that is incredibly important. We've grown very soft, just a couple reference points. One, I was listening to, I don't know if it was a sermon or what it was, but it was a theologian talking. And he basically was saying the one strategy that Satan has worked really well is for a couple generations, he's taught us to think that martyrdom and persecution is the exception to the rule, when really comfort is the actual exception. So we're living in, as American Christians, we're living in the exception of what the real Christian experience is. And that's why it's even more necessary for us to be reminded of the martyrs and that the real Christian life is picking up your cross and following him. Not, I hope God gives me a 20% raise next year so I can buy this new house and this new car because God wants to bless me, right? That is the exception to the rule. And that's actually what leads to the theology of glory, which I think has its fingers in all sorts of things in American Christianity, and it even makes its way into Lutheranism if we don't fight back against it. And having feast days like that throughout the year are great ways. Or we were talking about Perpetua, before this, like one of my favorite martyr stories. Those things are great reminders. And also with that, I wonder what your perspective is on this, but I've watched a couple of things, and I've been very much moved to say kids need to, like even at our kids, like 3 and 5 and 6 months, I don't know what she understands, like they need to hear these kind of stories. And even read things like Grimm's fairy tales.
They
like,
love it.
Yeah, they love it. Kids are not like they are not horrified by those things, but by understanding that those things can happen and be overcome, kids actually learn both courage and triumph and not fearing evil when they can hear these kinds of stories. So we shouldn't shy away from sharing these stories, even with your young kids. They can handle it. They really can.
Oh, for sure. And right, like, again, the importance of those days and to be able to share the stories with them is to be able to teach those lessons that are like hard to come by otherwise. And as you were saying, we have become very soft in society in a lot of ways, and kind of soft in our understanding of what it means to be a Christian, right? Being Christian isn't, just about American prosperity, or having an easy life or going to the nice suburban church and all of these things that I think we sometimes get the image in our mind about. And these things really give you a broader perspective of what that identity in life is and, what it can look like, and connects you again to the church that has gone before you and the church that will come after you. And is so encouraging because not only are we able to learn the stories of those that have undergone like extremely difficult times, and stayed true to Christ, and kind of use that as, a reminder for what our own existence can be. But then also as our own world gets like more inhospitable to Christians and like difficult to be able to navigate, it's a really good reminder for the fact that we too are able to get through those difficulties. And again, that it's Christ that walks alongside us and gets us there.
One other plug, Chesterton, I think it's the Abolition of Man. No, that's C.S. Lewis. I think it's the Everlasting Man. He basically talks about, and he says, he talks about kind of this combat between the church and the world, and how the world, continually thinks it's killed the church, and then the church sprouts up. And he talks about the 5 deaths of Christianity kind of historically, but he says the last thing to remain are the habits, right? And and you can see that like in some of the, you'll get kind of the stereotypical like lapsed Catholics, but the lapsed Catholics will still do those like habits, right? Like those things stick on us. Sometimes we poke at them for that, and we're like, oh, they're not real Christians, and like I don't know what the individual stories are, but it's actually good that those habits are there, because those are the last things that remain. If you don't have those habits, then as soon as like the intellectual understanding leaves, like then you're just done. Like if you've just based your entire church life on important messages from the pulpit and like, these 45 minutes, we can cut the liturgy out, and like, because it's all about this intellectual transfer of knowledge. It's like, okay, as soon as that dies, like what else remains in your Christian life? Like as soon as you're like, I don't really like the moral teachings of Christianity, and so I'm just going to throw it away because I want to go do what I want as a college kid. Like, what else is there? Like, there's no like, like, oh, like this event's coming up, or Christmas is coming up, or like Epiphany's coming up, or like, oh, I'm missing out on this like daily habit that I did all my life in the evening, right? Those are tough things to kind of weed out of your life. So if you put those things into your kids' life, like those will remain when the kids struggle with maybe an intellectual understanding.
Yeah, for sure. It's a whole investment in the person, right? And in cultivating that faith. And it's not, just about catechesis happening in confirmation class or in Sunday school, or kind of these other like points of children education that we think of within the way that we've set up our institutional systems, but knowing that does really happen most importantly in the day-to-day lives, and through the impacts that, churches and homes and schools have on children and stuff like that when they learn those things. And I mean, those habits, again, it doesn't have to be like just superficial things, but if someone has grown up a Christian and, been taken to church by their parents every Sunday, and then, sadly leave the faith in adulthood, they should feel bad that they're not going to church every Sunday, right? They should see people dressed up walking down the street. I walk my kids to church every Sunday when the weather is nice, even though we live like a mile from church or whatever. And I'm always like walking, down the street in my dress, and my kids are dressed up. And I'm like, I hope someone sees us, not because I want to guilt trip anyone, but we as a society should try to promote these messages that like Christianity is still alive and well. And that we should go to church on Sunday. You should feel bad if you don't pray before meals. You should see people out in public praying before meals, all of these different things. And so if there's any way that we can try to make that like more visible in the life of Christians that, live their daily lives, like that's a bonus. That's a win for everyone.
Yeah. Well done to my parents, because I was kind of a bozo in college in some ways. And the one thing was like Sunday was always like, if I didn't go to church on Sunday, like I felt really guilty. And that was good, because maybe the next Sunday I went. So like that was good. Like those were habits. And like anytime I broke that habit, it felt wrong. So we've kind of touched on a lot of this, but maybe if you want to give maybe just kind of a more of a deep dive, or if there's anything else you want to say about just the importance of liturgy, right? Or what that is. Because I think that gets thrown around a lot, or there's a lot of misconceptions around liturgy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I think of the way that like liturgy of the church and kind of the habits, again, of the church, the way that it's formed.
Is that a good way to describe liturgy, the habits of the church?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so, right? At least in the way that it like has distinct patterns and a system that has evolved over time that's been, again, very intentional. It's creation. It's not just something that's like thrown together haphazardly. Like there was a reason and a meaning behind the way that things were done. And we've tried to adhere to those as time has gone on. I mean, the way that we can bring those into the rest of our life and kind of see the church year as always just being what the church was, not just something that only some Christians adhere to, or like only some parts of, whatever denomination it might be, like care about. We can again see the value in teaching through that tool and kind of living into that as much as possible. And so when you think about the church year and kind of the importance of it, again, to the life of a Lutheran and like its steering towards Christ and its educational component, I mean, we are always encouraged in the fact that the different seasons, the different patterns that are put together are for particular like moments or kind of focuses that we should be especially adherent to. So you think of like Lent and Advent and how those are especially penitential seasons of the church year, where like there's more inward reflection and we're really preparing ourselves for the joy that is to come in Christmas and Easter and things like that. I mean, we don't want to ever forget those things, right? If you forget the meaning of Easter and Christmas, what is the life of a Christian? Like, what do you have to hold on to? And so the church year really does the work for trying to kind of set up that pattern for you. And has so much richness and intentionality put together in it. It's like, if you're looking for a certain theme in the Bible to focus on, or you want to teach a certain story to your kids, or, someone that's learning what the Christian faith means, or there's like a particular commandment that is important to remember, part of our catechism that we kind of focus on, you're going to find that in the church year. Like the church year really provides all of it to you. It's just you trying to then figure out how you can best utilize that and like have that be the starting point for further Christian education, which is why I think one of the things my husband says, at the end of his confirmation time, when he like sends his confirmands off, after the service and they're kind of done with his class that he engages in, he's like, okay, what is your job now? To learn about the church year, to continue that personal education for the rest of your life, because there's always going to be more to kind of sink into and to live into. And that's why it's not just for kids. It's not just for moms and dads. It's not just for homeschooling families. It's not just for, a sector of people that are already invested or interested in these things. It's for all Christians, full stop.
Yes, you make me think about, we've talked before about kind of the downfall of the last 70 years in Christianity. And one of the big things is, I mean, these were high up decisions that started in the Catholic Church and then kind of continued on. And basically it was kind of watering down the faith. And to put the best construction on it, they weren't like, let's dumb down our people, but they were like, let's just try to make it more simple, a little bit less, more palatable. That's a good way to put it, right? Doctors and rhetoric over here, right? So that goal, one of the problems that we run into now that we've done that successfully for 70 years is I feel like we only had like 3 or 4 talking points so often. And it's like, you're forgiven, like you're going to heaven, Jesus loves you, like, but I hear people say all the time, like, Jesus won't judge you or something like that. Like we get these like, and that's it. Right. And some of those are even misconstrued. Some of those are certainly true, but like, that's it. And I think that from like a parental perspective, if that's all you've been receiving or whatnot, like sometimes it's tough to teach the fullness of the faith. Right. And you're like, okay, well, where do I go next? Like, do I just read through the book of Hebrews with my like 5-year-old? Like, what do I do? And that's where this value of the church year is just, it's so readily accessible for you. It's right. It's like, have you ever talked about Epiphany at home? Well, guess what? We have a time period set aside in the year for you to talk about Epiphany. And there's resources on your website and elsewhere that can basically say, and here's how you teach a 5-year-old. Here's some like practical things you can bake this with your kids. You can read these scripture passages. You can look at these hymns, which are going to be very articulate with great articulation, tell you what Epiphany is about and how that fits into the whole story, or Lent, or, Trinity Sunday, or all of these different kind of events throughout the year. Like, it, as a starting point, like, you can just plug and play that at home, right? If you've just talked about how Jesus loves you and kind of like your core, like 6 stories in the Bible, and that's what you've done as parents, like, tomorrow you can start just doing the simple church year, and you've got all the resources at your hand for you to learn and for your kids to learn and to do it on a yearly basis. And you'll get the fullness of faith from that.
For sure. Yeah. You don't have to be like personally on top of everything to be able to kind of learn more and appreciate it. I mean, to tell you how much I've learned about this in the last 3 years since we started this is incredible. Like, if I had to articulate one thing that's been the most important for my growth as a Christian, especially as a young adult, it's been learning more about these things. It's been realizing the connections that are there across space and time, and the way that kind of this whole Christian narrative comes together. And as you were saying, it's such a shame that we have kind of dumbed down things or tried to distill it into just like these little boxes, right? Or these little categories that we put things into, instead of seeing the full richness and depth that really is played out, right? Because that expands across all of us. Like, the wealth of information that there is to find about what being a Christian means and the ways that we articulate that goes beyond any one human being, right? Like, it's literally infinite. And so being able to kind of enjoy that and not be overwhelmed by it or kind of fearful or being like, oh, I don't know what to do. Like, instead, just brace it wholeheartedly, right? This goes back to kind of the idea of rhetoric too, where it just shouldn't be about, trying to like kind of simplify things down to the lowest common denominator so we can have like a superficial conversation about it. It should be actually trying to grapple with things and say, oh, I don't understand that. Let me go talk to my pastor. Let me go to the text itself. Like, now, as I've started to read through the church year, I've been so fortunate with Tessa, who again works on the project with me. We've gone to the primary sources. We've been reading Augustine. We've been reading the Martyrdom of Perpetua Felicitas. Like, being able to go to those original texts and say, wow, this is what the church was writing about these people and articulating in, the 3rd century, the 4th century, the 5th century. Like, what a great connection point. When you read through sermons of the early church fathers, they're speaking to you. They quite literally say, hearers of the word, like you right now, in this current day and age. How crazy is it that one of these, pastors or like great doctors of the church was saying something that would be impactful to my life today, even in the 21st century.
Wow. Yeah. So let's walk through. I'm trying to think here. Maybe the calendar. Do you think kind of walking through the calendar would be helpful? Sure. I also want to get to home altars, which I really want to pick your brain on. Which one do you want to do first?
Yeah, I mean, we can kind of walk through the church year. I mean, This is perfect, right? Because as I mentioned before, we're kind of nearing the end of the church year. The beginning of the church year starts at the beginning of Advent. And so it's perfect because we're like getting to that point right now in just a couple of weeks.
This is well timed. And we're recording this on Friday and you're airing on Monday. This is the quickest turnaround we've ever done for an interview. So that is perfect. So yeah, you could, if you're listening to this, you can go to the website. In fact, now might be a good time to pull it up. Should we pull that calendar up?
Yeah.
Is that available?
Yeah. I mean, the calendar will be ready next week. And so I can certainly talk about it, but we can like pull up the website or whatever, talk about things too. So you can see here on our site that we have a little list of like upcoming holy days where we specifically highlight what is coming up next on the calendar. And we always have like a little introductory post that kind of gives you a brief overview of what the day is and its significance, etc. And then we have a second post that comes out that highlights exactly what a tradition or custom might be, how to exactly commemorate it in your home, kind of the more practical application of it. And
so that's a separate. So the traditions is a separate tab.
Yep.
Okay. And then so for those just listening on like our podcast and not on YouTube, allthehousehold.com. We'll put the link in the show notes. And we're looking at a couple different tabs. Upcoming holy days is right on the home tab. And then traditions is a separate tab.
Traditions, yeah, you can get to the traditions just by scrolling down on the homepage. But then if you go up to the very top, we also, and if you click into this would be great. If you click on just holy days at the very top, we have the list of days that we've written about for the entire church year. If you scroll down, divided by month. And so you can see all of the different upcoming days. You can, go to a month that you're particularly interested in. Maybe you're saying like, hey, what can I do to prepare for like Easter next year, what was already written about in the past. And we update this every year, right? Because the church calendar does change depending on when Easter falls, when some of these movable days actually occur.
So do you recommend, so there's a lot of dates on here.
Yeah, we've tried to cover all of the dates that are listed in the front of the LSB. So we have our Lutheran calendar that's
So this is not
published.
Roman Catholic.
No. And I would love to talk about that, right? We have like a particular flavor of what Lutheran days look like. And we have such a rich heritage with Lutherans particularly.
Yeah.
Which is like wonderful because oftentimes, folks will say, oh, this sounds too Catholic, or why do we care about this person in connection with whatever denomination or, faith tradition they're associated with.
So would you recommend, like in your own household, I'm looking at October, there's probably like 12?
Yeah.
15? Like, do you do every single one of these?
No. So this is one of the other things that we always try to know, right? Is like, if you're first getting started with this, it can be like, oh, wow, am I supposed to commemorate all these days? Or like, I don't even know who this person is. How would I go about learning about them? No, like start small, right? Start with what you're most interested in. Maybe there's a saint that you already have a connection with. Maybe again, you have a child who shares the same name as one of these saints. And if that was the case, then that's when their name day falls, right? Is their name day that you can celebrate is on the same date on which that saint is commemorated by the church. Maybe, you are in the middle of summer and you're like, what do I do with my kids? Like go to July, take a look around. Again, obviously we have things listed for some of the most important days of the church year. And so like,
so you do highlight some of the most important, like kind of a beginner start. Where would that be found?
Yeah. So if you go down, again, on that page, you'll see that we are highlighting Palm Sunday, which this last year fell on March 24th. We have the Annunciation, which marks when the angel visited Mary, right, and told her that she was pregnant with Jesus.
Do you have a place on your website that would tell us like what the most important ones would be?
No, but if you do go into your Lutheran service book, the hymnal, it lists kind of the difference between the most like high feasts of the year and then some of these other saints that just fall to the side. And we always prioritize the days that deal with Jesus, right? And deal with like the events of his life. So this is why, of course, you think of Pentecost, Easter, Christmas being highlighted. And then, if you think of like, what is the importance that Saint Polycarp has? Like this is going to fall to the wayside, right? It is still really important to learn about and something to definitely like strive to.
Okay. So if someone's thinking about, maybe I want to try this year, maybe go to this page, go to the beginning of the hymnal, kind of pick out maybe 2 a month or something like that, with the exception of things like maybe Lent or Easter. There's going to be more that kind of come together at a certain time.
Yeah.
And then there's traditions and everything found on your website that'll tell you basically how to celebrate this at home. Is that right?
Yep. How to celebrate it. We always list a prayer that's like in correlation with the day. We usually link to different resources that have been put out, especially by Synod on these days. So like Issues, etc. Often puts out, episodes that deal with all of the days, whether it's a saint or it's another like remembrance of a like big event that's occurred in the church or something like this. If there's like a different article that we've come across or kind of used in our own education, right? Because we've had to learn about all these things. Like there is no one resource or no one place to learn about the church year very well, which was kind of the exigence or like importance for our project, as I mentioned, because when we first got started with this, we're like, where do you even go? I don't know how to learn this stuff. Like, how do I recover these traditions and customs that have been forgotten? Like, surely someone knows, but it's not like they're written down in one little handy, like, this is how you are, this is how to be a Lutheran sort of guidebook. And then we were so reassured when we started to talk to people and heard that that was their experience too. They're like, I've been looking for, information like this for such a long time. And so, part of our process has been going to these books, looking up sermons that different pastors have written about the different days of the year, utilizing a lot of these great resources put out by Synod and trying to just put it into one place.
Okay. This is fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to explore this for our
you.
own family. There's also a Patreon up on the upper right.
Yeah.
Just so you know, because this does cost money.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So when we started the project, our goal was really just to go through the dates listed in the LSB as mentioned. And then over time, we've also added to those as well. And so there isn't one particular like Lutheran church year calendar, if you will. Like we don't have that be part of doctrine of the church like the Catholics would or something. And so different pastors over time have put together different variations of the days and the people they think are important. And so for one of the examples, we go to Pastor Leah, from the very
Mhm.
early Lutheran Church, he put together a sanctoral martyrology of all the days that he thought were important. And so we've gone back to those and actually highlighted some of the people that are found there that aren't found in the LSB, because we've said, okay, well, this was a really important pastor that obviously knew so much more than we do about the church year. Like if he thought someone was worth commemorating, they probably are. Like we should learn more about them too.
Mhm.
And so we've tried to kind of put these different things into conversation with one another, if you will. But again, that's like one of the great things about the Lutheran flavor or brand of this is, if you go into the Catholic or the Orthodox church or whatever, there's such an adherence to like the exact way to habitualize these different days or people, as you mentioned, things that really stay ingrained. But in the Lutheran world, like not only are we focused more on how this is like a tool to kind of teach about Christ, but there's so many great Lutheran saints that we're going to remember that other people don't necessarily have as part of their tradition. So this is a great response to people, that sometimes are like taken, how do I say this? Like they are really enchanted by Catholicism or enchanted by Orthodoxy because they're like, look at the wonderful traditions they have. Look at the ways that they teach about the church. I love their aesthetics. I love the rich history that they have with all of this. And they feel like Lutheranism is really lacking. Like that's maybe one of the reasons that they are intrigued about those different traditions. But like my response is that we do have a lot of that in the Lutheran church. We just, again, have to kind of work to uncover it. But, learning about Leia, as I mentioned, learning about any of the other like, big pastors that first brought Lutheranism to the U.S. and kind of struggled through those crazy time periods. If you've ever like read those stories or like listened to what it meant to be a Lutheran in the early Americas, like that was a crazy time, right? Like definitely a good learning experience to kind of understand what that time was like. But then you even think about like really great Lutherans like J.S. Bach. I mean, like so many people herald Bach as literally the greatest musician of all time, right? Like that's his title. And as someone that has a rich music background, like I knew of Bach from my earliest days. Like I didn't know that he was a Lutheran until later. I didn't know that he articulated the Lutheran faith so beautifully in his music in a way that, surpasses the spoken word, right? If you talk about the importance of rhetoric, like look at the rhetoric of music in J.S. Bach, like look at the way he was able to articulate the faith just through, the notes and the combination of the hymn, like libretto that he used and things like that. And so the fact that we get to celebrate him every year on the day that he died to go to be with Christ, and we get to say, not only was this guy a really great musician, and you should probably listen to all of his cantatas that, by the way, correlate with the church year, because every piece that he wrote to play in the church matches one of the days of the church year. So that can be one of
Is this the 1 year or 3 year, do you know?
The historic lectionary.
The 1 year.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's obviously what would have been around during Bach's time, since the 3 year wasn't invented yet.
Yeah, that's true.
But if you want a way to celebrate the church year, just listen to one of Bach's cantatas every single Sunday or every single one of these days that comes up. But the fact that we get to celebrate him every year and say, how wonderful that he lived a life of faith and went to go be with God upon his death, and that he was able to use that faith to inspire so many believers or unbelievers, like in the beauty of his music. This should be something that's championed and that we teach our young Lutherans about. Like, we should be so proud of that.
If I can just do a side plug, or real quick, also just to highlight Andy Richards.
Yes.
He's got Bach to Church, BACH to Church, where he's recovering a lot of those musical pieces and helping them kind of be reintegrated back into the church. But to your point about like the Catholics and Orthodox, okay, because for probably a lot of our listeners, this is not something that they've got eyes on or they're plugged into, right? To whereas, yourself and certainly myself, I've been watching this with keen interest for a couple years, but there's been a big movement out of evangelicalism and towards the Catholic and Orthodox.
Yes.
As a person, I mean, I'm meeting with somebody who has a pastoral background and is coming out of one of these more evangelical backgrounds. And basically, he was looking at either the LCMS, the Orthodox, or the Catholic, right? And his questions, and his worries in the LCMS was, are you guys going to stick to your traditional roots, or are you guys going to go progressive, right? So for people that are just going about their daily business, they probably aren't recognizing those trends, but they are absolutely taking place, right? Especially with people in our age group, right? 30s, 20s. Young people are not flocking towards more evangelicalism, although there's always going to be big box churches that are big. but they're actually flocking towards traditionalism. And one of the things that we've failed at in the last, 70, 80, 90 years is we've kind of been slowly ditching our tradition and forgetting that we have those things, which is why a lot of those people that have left the evangelical world have gone Orthodox or Catholic because they haven't lost as many of those things in the last 70, 80 years. And what you're working on, what Richardson's working on, and what there's a lot of other people that we've had on here that are articulating is that, no, we do have this. Like, this is our heritage. We've forgotten it for the last 70, 80 years. It's a big failure, the fact that we've done this, but our road to success is just going back to those things. Okay, this isn't like a business strategy, but if it was, it's like people are flocking towards these things. This is our heritage. And for some reason, we're like, no, don't want anything to do with that. We just want to kind of continue to go the American Christian route, which is showing itself to fail. And that's where, like, we need projects like what you're doing, some of these other projects to get back and say, no, we actually do have these things. And to your point, you can live a liturgical year in the Lutheran Church, not because you're inventing it, but because that is part of our heritage. It's not just part of the Catholic heritage or the Orthodox heritage. And by the way, if you believe in, the tenets of the Reformation, we're doing it in a way that matches more so with the way the early church did. And we've avoided some of these errors that grew up in the church. And that's kind of what your husband's big shtick was, is that like, we are the Catholic Church. Like, we claim that we are the church historic, and that the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, is a schismatic group that broke away. And therefore, you don't have to go to them in order to receive these beautiful traditions. You can do that in the LCMS.
Oh, for sure, right? This is the church. Like, this is just what the church traditions have been. And we're so lucky as Lutherans to be able to claim that as our own and say, right, like, this is what we buy into. This is the group that we kind of fall into. And, it's a shame in terms of the fact when folks are like looking for other faith traditions and they're really drawn to all of these beautiful, wonderful things. I totally get it, right? But like, the LCMS does exist, right? Like, hello, we're out there. Like, come find us. Like, there are people that are invested in these things as much, if not more so, than some of these other groups too. And I have, lots of friends where this has been their experience as well. They grew up evangelical and now they're Orthodox, or they went to other church bodies in search of those things. But a lot of times it's because they didn't know that the Western church had this as part of their tradition. And, as Westerners, like, this should be something that we champion, right? This is something ingrained in us, a way of doing Christianity that is going to be way more comfortable and like close to who we are than, being Eastern or Eastern Orthodox, where like that's separate. My husband and I both have spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe and Russia. And we love it so much. That's a lot of my research.
Latvia, right?
Yeah, research area, actually, like in terms of my professional sphere. But, we're not Eastern. Like, that's not part of our faith tradition. And there's so many parts of that that's just different from who we are because, of all of these other cultural factors, historical factors, etc. And so that being able to champion that in our own church and say, like, no, this is really part of what the church is, and, the history that we can look back to for all of these generations, like, what a great thing. We just need to be sharing that with more people and kind of getting the word out.
And two things real here. I just want to lean into this because I think this is important. And the timing's kind of interesting because I think this whole aspect has been a theme, I think, that's built in. Like I said, I learn a ton from these interviews, right? And I think that this has just been a recurring theme that we haven't planned, but it's just kind of continually come back up, probably in our interviews over the last 2-3 months, right? So in many ways, this is kind of a good capstone, not that some of our future ones won't have that as well, but of just kind of reflecting on this. Two things. One, like, this is an area where I've been kind of continually converted, right? And I wouldn't say I was like fully evangelical, but I was much more oriented that way. And over the years, the more that I've learned, even certainly throughout like the year of this podcast, I've just been kind of red pilled, or my eyes have been open to the importance of this. And then, like I said, watching some of the trends, I'm just realizing not only is it right, not only is it actually the best kind of showing of beauty and goodness, but it's actually what people want, right? And that's not the reason you do something, but it's always sad when, like, so like if, I don't know, football analogy, right? Like, if I'm a Detroit Lions fan, sometimes you lose. But like, if we sat our best players on the sideline and we lost, like, that's a different experience because you're going like, we shouldn't be losing. Like, why aren't our best players on the field? Like, I understand sometimes you lose and sometimes you win, but it's kind of that way now where it's like, we've been losing for a while, but we're losing because we're not putting our best foot forward. Like, we've just kind of taken these great resources, put them aside, and adopted something that kind of has failure inbred in it to some degree. And then we're like, well, why are we failing? And then we kind of double down on that and say, well, maybe if we do that a little bit harder. And it's like, no, bring these great resources back. Like for every one person we convert, we've lost 7.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, our kids have bled out of the church.
Exactly.
Right? Satan prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And guess what? They've devoured our own kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've allowed that to take place. Not on purpose. Like people aren't setting out to say, I want my kids to walk away. But these are great resources that the church understood. Like bring these habits into your household. Like don't make Christianity just something that takes place twice a month on a Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
and something that doesn't even drip of our Christian expression, but smells a lot more like Americanism with a little bit of Christianity kind of filtered in. Like maybe that's why we've been losing some of these battles, and maybe returning to that is like just what we need to do for the sake of our kids.
Yeah, exactly. Like if it hasn't worked, which like I think if we look at the situation critically, we can say that we have lost something significant in the
Mm-hmm.
last, X many decades of Christianity. Like you should change things up instead of just continuing forward,
Mm-hmm.
and saying, okay, well, I guess we'll just do the same old because that's all I know how. Like, no, like have some fire, be encouraged, like try something new with passion, like actually be excited about these things. And there is, so many resources that is just a return back to how we used to view church life, the faith, Christianity, the way that these things work together with one another.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a quick break. And then I want to get into like home altars and whatnot.
Yes.
We could certainly explore this topic more too, but we would need a 2-part series, I think.
Yes. Well, I'm happy to be back. So.
Yes. Okay. Sounds good. All right. And Bennett says we are back. So I really want to jump into, because this is something we'll talk about it at home, but I'm very interested in trying to figure out how we can work this into our household. So particularly like the candles and things like that with kids. I'm very interested in, tell me about the importance of a home altar, and then we can get into kind of how you might be able to, construct one or build that into your house.
Yeah. The idea of a home altar, might be unique to some listening, or like Lutherans that have had, their house set up in a way where they try to, have a place for them always to like say prayers at home or devotions in the same place. So it really, again, is just supposed to be an area that kind of reminds you of what life as a Christian looks like, that you should be adopting these daily habits, right? That you should be encouraged to pray unceasingly, as the Bible tells us, etc. And so it's wonderful with kids because it serves as that physical reminder. It also kind of steers your home life towards a central focal point, if you will, right? If you think of like what you might include in a home altar space, like obviously a crucifix, maybe some Christian art, maybe some icons, maybe other symbols or pieces of the church that you have in your home, things like baptismal candles that you were given when your child were baptized, the prayer books, if you have a hymnal, if you have Bible, if you have the treasury of daily prayers mentioned or something, this is a great place to house all those things, right? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, sometimes they're just kind of like lying around. Mm-hmm. So it's great for that. And then, as you mentioned too, like candles, a place to actually try to utilize this space to help commemorate and think about the way that we posture ourselves towards God. And so, as we sing in our prayers, like our prayers should be like the rising of incense, right? So you maybe burn incense as part of your home altar, mm-hmm. or at least the flame of a candle, kind of represents these things for a home life too. And so it's a wonderful practice to adopt. Another kind of tip or thing to keep in mind with it too is have it face east if possible. So if you think of like a place in your house where you can put a home altar on an eastern facing wall, because obviously mm-hmm. that again mimics the way that the church sets herself up towards the expectation of Christ coming. Mm-hmm. So yeah, all of those things are kind of what you can keep in mind with a Lutheran home altar curation.
So let's walk through some of those. Let's do the candles first, because I think on your website you kind of spoke about it, and that resonated with me. And you talked about how even just like the flickering of the candle like keeps kids' attention, mm-hmm. right? And there's that aspect of that, and also just the excitement of it, right? So I'm thinking of our young kids, and they always love when we light candles,
yes.
right? Which kind of goes into both the candles and the incense. Like when it's fall time, like we all want to burn like pumpkin spice, candles or whatever it is. Yes. Like we like a certain smell, and the church has always understood that we as creatures, one of our senses is that we smell, and that actually has an impact. Like there's a reason that therapists and stuff use that now. They're like, well, burn this lavender candle mm-hmm. to help you relax in the evening, and Incense does something like that. It creates a certain type of mood, right? So that's one aspect. But then the candles create a great focal point and show the kids or the adults that there's something different going on here, right? We've been going about our daily business with whatever our evening looks like. And now all of a sudden we've got candles, the lights are down, the focal point is away from the distractions and everything else.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It really is supposed to focus our attention and kind of engage those senses. As we talked about, the church has set herself up to really embrace those things, right? Like when you eat a special treat for a feast, it should be enjoyable. It should be something to really live into and find, great happiness in. Same thing with the lighting of a candle or the burning of incense. Like these are meant to pleasure our senses in a good way, to remind us of the good things of God, and, set that time aside to be different. And one of the things that I like to think about with any of those aspects, whether it's candles or incense or food or, whatever you enjoy, drinking wine even, right? Like if you think of like opening a bottle of champagne or like a really lovely red or white on a certain feast day or something, like all of these things were given by God to us Christians as good things. I mean, we as Christians can be so thankful because our God loves us so immensely and gave us really wonderful things to enjoy. And he has set time aside in the year for us to actually enjoy that. And that's a great, comparison or difference to Christianity from other religions. As you look at the gods of other religions, they hate their people, right? Like
you have to appease them, right?
Yeah, you have to appease them, or like it's always about fasting. It's always about these acts of penance that you have to do to remediate sins or kind of the human condition or whatever. And in the Christian year, like, yes, we have those times and we embrace those times. As mentioned, Lent and Advent can be part of that. And there's so much beauty and wonderful things that come out of that too. That again are part of kind of this Christian education on the church year. But if anything, those wonderful, great times of happiness, joy, and excitement, and even just the small joy that can be found in day-to-day life existence through, the lighting of a candle, if it is, or, the burning of incense or whatever it might be, the looking at a beautiful piece of art, and really enjoying in that revelry, like that is such a great thing that can get you through, a really bad day.
One thing I like about this, I've always been, I shouldn't say always, but probably the last maybe 2 years, I've been very enticed by the understanding of like the Sabbath. And I've heard Prager talk about this, right? And at one point, I think it was actually, we were talking about the Jordan Peterson roundtable on the book of Exodus, that you watched some. And I think it was there where he just kind of made this plea because most of the people there are Christian. And then there's Jordan Peterson, whatever Jordan Peterson is. And then there's, Prager, and sometimes Ben Shapiro was there. But, Prager's kind of the Jewish representative. And he's like, the one thing I wish for my Christian friends, and he's very polite and everything throughout the whole narrative. And he's like, I want you guys to understand the beauty of the Sabbath. He's like, because he's like, what's the punishment for missing a Sabbath? You've missed the Sabbath. He's like, it feels like I have Christmas every single Saturday because like our kids are at home, like we're around a table, like we have a 3-hour meal where we're conversing and dialoguing. There's this beauty around this and we look forward to it. And like, it gives meaning to working really hard on Thursday because, come Saturday, we've got a day that's just at rest. Right. And when he talks about it, it's beautiful, and it is beautiful. Like God, that's one of the reasons God gave it in the Old Testament. But you don't necessarily, as you're talking, you don't necessarily have to go to the Jewish tradition of the Sabbath. We have our own Christian traditions that accomplish that very same thing. You talked about red wine and nice incense or something, right? We might look forward to those events like a anniversary or another holiday or something like that, where like we get to have a celebration. But if you build these things in like on a somewhat regular basis, there's something to look forward to say like this up and coming Friday is this feast. And like, part of that feast is like we have champagne, or I don't know, I haven't looked into this like you have, or maybe like we're going to have a red wine, or we're going to have like this special dessert or this special meal, and it's going to have meaning behind it, but it's going to be a time of relaxation and time of joy that is centered on the source of our joy. And there's a reason behind all of these things, but those are things you look forward to on a Tuesday to say, this Friday is the feast of, once again, I don't know your calendar year like you do, but here's the feast that's coming, and we're going to do these things, and it's going to be enjoyable, and the kids can look forward to it. We can talk about it, and we're going to look forward to it. And that's a beautiful thing that should be part of our life.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And it just provides the opportunity for that, where it's not obligation. You shouldn't feel like you have to do it, or there's a certain formula for the exact right way to celebrate a certain day. Right. This goes back to what you had mentioned before about like the subjectivity of kind of the way in which we celebrate the days, or like the wiggle room that can look way different in one person's household to the next, which is great. But it should be something that we do find joy and excitement in. And, as you had mentioned, like there's certainly opportunities to do that even in connection with the Sabbath, but it doesn't have to be a whole day set aside for that either. Like, obviously we should enjoy the Sabbath every week and regard that and keep it holy as the commandment tells us to. But at the same time, like praying with your kids for 5 minutes around flickering lights on a random Thursday night, like can provide some of that as well.
So let's go through some of the other elements you mentioned. Let's do the crucifix, and then I want to do icons.
Yes.
Okay. Icons probably a little more. We can talk a little bit more in depth. So why is the crucifix important? And the crucifix, correct, is not just an empty cross. It's a cross where you have Christ on the cross visibly. Is that right?
Yeah, crucified Christ on the cross, right? And this is another one of those things that sometimes, depending on maybe what Lutheran background you grew up in, you think of that not being very Lutheran or that being Catholic, right? That we think of the empty cross because that represents Christ's resurrection, which is ultimately where we find our joy. But again, thinking of the cross, as this tool of torture, as a place where Christ died, where our sins were atoned for, where that act of salvation occurred. What a holy and special and beautiful thing. There's no more beautiful image in the entire church than that. And so be able to have that in your home and have that be a central focal point for everything. If you just have one Christian in your symbol in your home and it's one crucifix, like that's all you need to be able to direct your eyes towards, the real meaning of Christianity in that way. And so of course a home altar is an appropriate place for that. But you'll see this occurring in so many different places. Perhaps it's hanging a small crucifix over the doorway of your houses. You'll sometimes see that. Or over a bedroom frame, or something like that too, where, it's supposed to direct someone's eyes and attention at all points of their day.
What about icons?
Yes. So this can also be uncontroversial, right? And this is not a Lutheran tradition. This is not something that comes from Lutheranism or has historically been part of our Lutheran identity, etc. But it all goes back to what the idea of Christian visuals and art are, right? Like I had mentioned that it could be just Christian art in general too. And this is great because there's been so many artists and depictions of wonderful Christian scenes in the history of the church. Again, some of these things have been lost. Like, I don't think it was until I was, somewhat into adulthood that I realized that if you studied art, if you were going to train to be an artist up until, the Reformation, you painted biblical scenes. You painted scenes from the church year. This is why if you go to a art museum in France or Germany or the Netherlands or whatever, and you walk around, you're going to see 10 different depictions of the Annunciation because this is what people were painting. This is what they're focusing on. This is how they learned to hone their art. And how wonderful, because you have so many depictions of this monumental scene within the Christian faith. And you're able to use that as a teaching tool, a meditation tool, a way to, again, kind of further your education on a certain area. And we've just done away with that, right? We've forgotten that we don't even display Christian art in our homes anymore. And so to be able to have icons and other Christian visual depictions as part of the encounters that we have every day, it just is that gentle reminder to turn your eye towards Christ and that gentle reminder to think upon things of the church here. And sometimes that's even why you'll see people switch out the art in their homes seasonally. And so, maybe they have a little icon collection and they're constantly displaying, a visual of a saint from that month or a feast that's coming up, and they have a different rendition of the nativity versus, Easter and the hallowing of hell or something like that. They kind of make sure they rotate out on a seasonal basis. But then this also goes with just trying to find places in your home that gently remind you of always thinking about Christ in your words and actions. And so maybe this is why you have an icon of the Lord's Supper next to your dining room table, because you think every time that you sit down to pray and eat with your family that it is a
type.
A mirror of what is to come, right? In the feast that we share with God for all eternity, and, the wonderful food and everything that will be prepared for us in that way. And that's the same thing with any other, little depiction that you might try to encourage your mind towards.
And as a little extra plug for that too, if anyone missed the Dr. Harold Ristow interview, who's kind of a lead. He's got a lot of other things that he's kind of experts in, but he's probably one of the biggest experts in the LCMS on exorcisms. And he does a big plug for icons as far as kind of spiritual warfare in the household.
Yes, for sure. No, there's a direct connection there. And this is also why we should encourage the creation of Christian art nowadays, right? For all of the burgeoning Lutheran artists out there, keep doing what you're doing. We try to support that immensely on our blog, and we always share historic Christian art pieces in the description of the days that we work on. And we have a calendar that also correlates with the Christian year that you can actually purchase and display in your home or your church or your school, etc. And with that, we always try to display like some significant art piece that correlates to the month. That way, even if you have a calendar up on your fridge, right, like we do, automatically you're beautifying your house in one additional way that's based on the church and the messages of Christ.
And your calendar, when this comes out, correct? Like the calendar should be up on your website because it's something that you can order. And like you said, you can put on your fridge or whatever, right? And that way it's just kind of a constant reminder.
Yeah. Like as you were asking about earlier, how do we know about the significant days of the church, or like how do we kind of remember these coming up? The calendar helps you do that because it lays it out for the upcoming year. So we just started this last year, and we have it coming out for the beginning of the church year / the beginning of the actual new year in January. So you can buy it, and it will start in December, actually, if you are interested in displaying it then. And we have sales for it starting next week. So if you go to our website, you can learn more about ordering one of the ones that we are going to have available and shipping out later in the fall. But it's all meant to, again, kind of encourage the education and, the display of art and the encouragement for folks to live into the year in this way.
Kneeling. Why is kneeling important? Or is it important?
Yeah, I mean, again, this goes back to sensory experiences. We should try to direct the actions that we do to mirror the confessions that we have of God, right? Going back to rhetoric, what does kneeling confess? What does kneeling articulate? That is a rhetorical move. There is some sort of message that is combined in the actions that we do. And so when you kneel, when you genuflect, when you bow your head at the saying of Jesus' name during the divine service, or when you're praying at home, when you make of the sign of the cross before you say your meal prayers, or at the end of the Lord's Prayer, or something like this, those are all supposed to remind you of, your subservience to God and the way that we present ourselves before him as mere servants, as, the lowly human beings that we are, understanding that, he is glorified above all.
What do you expect out of, how old are your kids?
3 and 1.
3 and 1. So kind of relative. What do you expect out of the 3-year-old?
Respect during prayers and, paying attention. Of course, this is difficult because there's sometimes like an ongoing commentary that's provided, but we do all of our prayers no matter what, no matter if there's a screaming child, no matter if someone, doesn't want to do them, even in the little toddler attitude. Of course, we're understanding. We're not just like beating prayers in if someone is wailing because of a dirty diaper or something like this. But we really try to encourage, the thought that this is just what we do at home. This is part of our habits. This is part of the way that we order our days. And you know what? They learn to love it. Like my little 3-year-old loves saying matins in the morning and praying that, at the table together, even though it's a long, complicated prayer. There's singing, like there's a lot of. No, I mean, they don't sing along necessarily all the words, but they try to participate in their own ways. And even the last couple of weeks, my toddler was asking me, what does it mean that my cry turns to you? What does this part of the liturgy mean? What do these words represent? And then, I have to try to explain to him why we say these things, that they have come from the church or even the Bible in a lot of cases. And so, again, just doing it at a very early age can help build that in. But of course, it's never too late to start. We have people ask us all the time, like I have an older kid or whatever it might be, just try to start small, try to start with any one aspect of it and just build it into your day.
When you're doing matins, what kind of posture do you expect from your kids? Like, are they kneeling? Is your 3-year-old kneeling the whole time? Are they just kind of in the room doing their thing? Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, just in the room. I mean, obviously, like folding their hands for the appropriate parts. We never like force or outright teach, like, you're supposed to make the sign of the cross at this point or something. Again, they're so young, like that's not going to be effective. But it's crazy how they mimic you, right? Even our 1-year-old, she's 19 months old, tries to make the sign of the cross just by like, awkwardly like waving her hands in the air. But it's clear that she's doing it because she sees that that's what we do too. And so, of course, that's how all education happens, is just through mimicry at the very beginning. And you can attach some meaning to it later on, but you don't need to be like overly hard hitting with that sort of thing, I don't think.
So you and Christian, basically, like you practice that, they're kind of in the room, you kind of engage them when you can engage them, and you also just understand that at certain times they might be kind of doing their own thing, but they're still participating in their own way.
Yeah. Think of just how you would hope a kid to be in the divine service, right? You want them to be there and participating and taking in what they can. But do you like not allow any sort of squirms or commentary? Like, no, that's probably unrealistic. But just having them there is going to be so significant.
Do your kids color in church?
It depends. I mean, we do have like some small things that try to engage them, but I'm also trying to be very intentional with not just having a lot of toys or a lot of activities that can distract them, because even young kids can pay attention, right? You can even say, sit here and listen to dad up front, in my case, or, we have children's Bibles in the pews. And so oftentimes we'll find the Bible story that correlates with the reading for the day and explain what's happening. This can also be why it's helpful to have like the little pamphlets that are handed out for children that correlate with the various lectionaries. And of course, that can be a great way for a kid to sit with a pencil or some crayons, perhaps, and kind of engage.
What's your thoughts on children's church?
Like a children's sermon?
No, more so like when kids are removed from the service.
Yeah, moved to this. Yeah, I don't believe in children being removed from the service at all, right? Because again, the way that they learn is by participating in the service and seeing what mom and dad do. And children are meant to be in church. Again, it's a visual sensory experience. There's not just an intellectual component to it. It's not just about them understanding like the big words used during the sermon. They take in all of the parts. Hopefully in your church, you do have a crucifix or a cross for them to look to. In our church, we have a statue of Jesus standing in the corner that they always comment on when we go up to communion. The baptismal font, maybe even taking some of the water from the font and making the sign of the cross. There's so many ways to help children be part of the church service that doesn't just mean moving them from church or making church dumbed down for their consumption.
Yeah. I remember Ryan McPherson was talking about this, and he was basically, he was giving an example of kind of undereducated group in American history at a certain time, and that they were still producing these just amazing rhetoricians, right? And he was like, one of the reasons is that community continually went to church, and they were in church as young kids listening to master rhetoricians giving sermons, and even whether or not at age 5 or age 7 they're able to understand everything, they are hearing proper rhetoric, right? And they're hearing, God's word, and these things are actually not informative. They mold and form the children, even to become just like good speakers, or they're molding them to the good, the true, and the beautiful, right?
Exactly, right. And that's just why taking it in, listening can be so much part of that process. And as you were saying, it's where we see rhetoric employed. Like that's the funniest part to me in terms of like kind of the intersection between my professional life and, my life as a pastor's wife, and obviously my involvement in the church is like, I see rhetoric at work all the time, like not only just with my husband's sermons, but the way that these things are articulated. And this is how rhetoric has been taught and carried out for so much of history. And I think a lot of times that has been kind of taken out of our education on rhetoric nowadays, depending on, if it's the college classroom where you're learning about it or something like that too. But it's so wonderful because you learn how to speak and think well just by listening to others being able to do it. And that encourages pastors, right, to be better preachers, to really push themselves to that. Because it's not just, for the sake of me showing up on a Sunday morning, if I go visit a church and, I'm the rhetoric professor, like, what am I going to think about something? But the parents that are listening to you, the children that are listening to you, like preach in a way that is going to be inspirational to a 5-year-old as well. That's not just dumbing the message of Jesus Christ down for them necessarily.
Yeah, we've noticed with our kids that there was a big jump. We started sitting next to another family whose 3, now 4 boys are very well behaved in church. And all of a sudden our kids they mimicked the other kids.
Yes.
And since then, 3 and almost 5 for the older 2. And they've gotten very good at sitting through church. And every once in a while there's a, outburst or something like that. But for the most part, they sit through.
Yeah. And it can be hard, right? There's definitely difficult stages, especially like at my kids' age or kind of the very younger toddler years. And Tess and I talk about this too often, where we, provide examples for what it looks like to be a part of the church and our own personal experiences in our lives with kids. But again, you just have to work really hard at it. And then hopefully it sinks in for like a life of engagement in the church, even though for the first couple of years it can be difficult.
Yeah, it pays off. So going back to kind of the liturgy in the home, there's a lot of resources on your page. Are there any like 1 or 2 that you would like to highlight or talk about? We've talked about the home altar. Is there anything else that you'd really like to highlight and talk through?
Yeah,
and if not, we can.
The Treasury of Daily Prayer, as mentioned before, if you're going to have one prayer book that you utilize, right, you should have the Bible, obviously, to read scripture. Hopefully you have a hymnal to be able to find hymns to sing in correlation with the part of the year that you're in. Luther's catechism obviously should be part of a Lutheran education, but like what's next? The treasury of daily prayer. Like that's such a wonderful resource because again, it gives you prayers for each of the days. It tells you when the saints' days are. It gives you a little biography of the person. And it walks you through everything that's listed there in the LSB. And so that's always like a go-to resource, I would say, for folks if they're looking just to have something in their home that can kind of help them commemorate the church year better. That's not just, looking at the hymnal or our blog even and trying to figure out what day is on, what weekend this upcoming year and what tradition are we supposed to do for it and all of that stuff.
Why are hymns important?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they articulate the faith. They give us a beautiful way to sing and share about what we believe. They've been written in these rich, wonderful contexts and circumstances that, again, provide so much relatability if you like kind of learn the story behind what's going on. We have a lot of the Lutheran hymn writers of like some of the greatest Lutheran hymns we find in our book are commemorated again throughout the year, and you can find information about them on our page. And so it's just crazy when you learn out who, Gerhardt was or like some of these other hymn writers, and you're like, wow, they faced so many trials and tribulations and confessed the faith in such a wonderful, articulate, authentic way. Like it's wonderful words for you to take as your own and kind of sing through your lips as also confessing it in that aspect. And then of course they just help you walk through the church year too. There's so many to utilize. You could sing a different hymn every single day or every single part of the church year and never get bored.
Yeah. Just as like a teaching tool too. We've done this with our 7th graders here. Where we just learned for the last month, we learned water, blood, and spirit crying. And probably 90% of them have it memorized. 10% do not, but it's given us just language as we're walking through Genesis, and we'd always start with that hymn. But there's so many different parts where you're able to go back to the language of water, blood, and spirit crying. And this would apply to, a lot of those hymns. And you're able to then bring those in. Because water, blood, and spirit crying is talking about the sacraments of the church, right? So then we're talking about Genesis 2, where Eve woman is formed out of the side of man, right? So we made the connection to Jesus and his blood and water coming out of his side. And that's the formation of the church and how the church is built out of the side of Jesus. That's the bride of Jesus. And then Adam out of his side is woman, right? So you've got this correlation there. And then they're able to attach it to water, blood, that's what's coming out of the side of Christ. That's the sacraments that are the base of the church. The Holy Spirit's at work, but it gives them this common language that they have kind of memorized that they all understand. And then you can tie these things back to there. So it kind of builds off of that structure.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And we learn things through music. Like music has always been a great memory tool, a way to help you remember words better. And also just a great way to like put an artful articulation to, feelings, emotions, all of these other things that are difficult to like put a tangible finger on. So I think that they're just wonderful for that too. And then if you just think of how the faith is written on our hearts and souls, like we pray for that it would be, obviously it's the words of scripture, which again, if you even think of the words that we know through liturgy, like the words that we say every single Sunday as part of our service, if you're saying the same words every Sunday as part of, the service in the book that you're doing, those become memorized. You have those written on you. Those can never be taken away from you. You will never forget, how to say the Lord's Prayer or the Apostles' Creed or the Agnus Dei or something like that. And it's the same thing with hymns. Like I always think about, Lord willing, this never happens, but I have been to many places in the world where this is a reality that you are locked up in jail, not even for being a Christian per se, but something bad happens to you and, you are taken away from your family and friends and all things in this life. What would you have to remember the faith by? What would you be able to articulate to yourself over and over again? Like hopefully those key things, hopefully part of Luther's catechism, right? That's why we try to memorize it, but also hopefully hymns, right? We all have Silent Night memorized. We all have some of these other like really key melodies and things, ingrained in our minds. But then can we also do that for some of the really substantial Lutheran hymns that have like such wonderful liturgy or such wonderful words as a part of them?
Why is Luther's small catechism important for education of your kids?
I mean, it tells you exactly what we believe about the Bible in a very articulate and palatable way. The same sort of thing as mentioned earlier, where you read that and it's like it was written for us right now. Like there's no way that it doesn't relate to your your personal circumstance and position, even though the words are not from this particular context or historical moment. And so it gives a simple way to articulate that. It gives a common language for the way that we believe things. And then we're always able to reference that, when someone asks or we ourselves are thinking about what something means in the faith, it's this wonderful tool to go back to over and over again.
Why not just memorize Bible verses?
I mean, certainly that's good too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we would never dismiss that. And that's like a wonderful part of Christian education. But the catechism, again, tells us what that actually means, right? What the interpretation is. We all know that there are so many interpretations of scripture nowadays, or that if anything, it just becomes a fight of one interpretation against another. You actually have to have an understanding of what that articulation is. And luckily, we have people that have put that together with, their wonderful knowledge, education, understanding of the biblical languages, things like that. You don't have to personally know all that. You can rely on those that have already been so well educated further than you could ever be to articulate those things.
And to your point earlier, this is when you memorize that, it's not just like one pastor's interpretation or perspective. Like when you're dealing with something like the Small Catechism, this is not just Luther's perspective. This is something that we as a church say, this is the Christian perspective. Like you can hang your hat on that and say that is the right articulation of what do we mean by the Lord's Supper, right? Or what do we mean by baptism? Right?
Exactly. And you can use that as then your talking points, if you will, or like way that you can engage in dialogue with others because it's already set you up and primed you for those conversations too. And that's why it's crazy to me when you'll hear of, faith traditions that like outright reject the Nicene Creed or like refuse to say a creed together because they think it's stodgy or like doesn't have a rich meaning. This is what the church has always believed. Like, this is the church. I mean, you can't do anything more than say this and articulate what the church's position is. Why would you outright reject that and do away with something that all Christians have adhered to for centuries?
Do you think that's part of kind of those shifts in education we were talking about, right? Where we've lost things like even the understanding of what rhetoric is. Has that kind of correlated with some of the ways that the church, particularly in America, has pushed back against some of these previously kind of understood anchors?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's a lack of understanding the power that words actually have and that words are intentional and meaningful, and that when words were put together, it wasn't just like one person's rendition of it, at least when we think of that in the church's context. And so trying to embrace that and see that as something to, again, like try to adhere to with all of your being instead of trying to push away from, which I think is just a different position at which you come at it with, right? Is you're like either looking to engage with others that have been part of the same conversation, or you're just taking yourself out of that conversation in the very first place because you're saying, nope, I refuse to even engage. I don't think that that's meant for me.
Yeah, that's one of the things. I mean, it happens in the non-denominational church, of course, by its very definition, but it can happen even in, certainly Lutheran contexts where I don't know what the right word for it is. I mean, I can certainly use some, maybe I'll avoid using those, but it's one of those things where, if I do things according to the way that Lutheran Church has done things historically, then you're not just learning from Brian, you're learning from the collection of the saints that have gone before me. But as soon as I start to like radically change aspects of those things, then I've removed myself from the tradition. And now if you're sitting, if I'm a pastor at your church, now you're just learning from me. And you're really trusting that Brian has figured it out in a way that Bach didn't figure it out, in a way that, Luther didn't figure it out, in a way that Augustine didn't figure it out. And full transparency, you want to learn from those guys more than you want to learn from me, right? They're whatever you want to call it. They're powerful forces of theology and understanding the scriptures. And it's good when I can sit at their feet. And that way, like if you're listening to a sermon from me, or if you're at a church service that I'm conducting, it's good if I've got this army of witnesses behind me, and therefore I'm one part of the piece, but I'm only a small part of the piece. And that should bring you comfort.
Exactly. Right. And that's like the concern that I see with so much of this, right? Is it just becomes the cult of personality of one person. And it's so selfish, right? Who am I to say that I like am smarter, more articulate, and know what the meaning of scripture is more so than all these other people, especially when they're in consensus and combined together. Like that's the craziest part to me, right? Because it all is meant to be in conversation with one another. Like a text is not just a text on its own. It's a text because it's a part of this other genre and milieu and combination of things coming together. And so it's really trying to understand that in its entirety and kind of have them be correlated with one another and read against one another, other than just looking at one thing solely on its own.
So what do you think about, and I think I might know, because I think what you're talking about actually kind of leads to the answer, but, I've heard a lot of people that'll say, it's kind of stodgy, or it's kind of ethnocentric, or whatever word they might use, kind of stuck up. when different pastors or, theologians or whoever, even just regular church members will kind of say, there's a certain way that we should do things as the Lutheran church. And they'll kind of be like, well, that's a little bit like we should be able to explore all of these different types of expression. What's kind of your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like exploring other types of expression is good. Going back to like one of the very first conversation points I think we had today was like about exposure to other people, right? And trying to constantly engage with the other side and knowing what their material is and like understanding as well as your own position, if anything. You have to constantly like go across the line and be willing to talk to others, understand what's going on, kind of be absorbed into the environment which has created them. And that's like part of the conversation. But then at the end of the day, you can still come back to what you believe in, right? Like just because you've been exposed to something else doesn't mean that we just have to automatically adopt it or kind of do away with what we've adhered to for such a long time, especially if you're comparing the two and you still find value in yours. And so I think that that's the difficulty, is that there is like this maybe excitement about exploring what else is out there. And that's good, but there isn't even enough knowledge about your own position to then compare the two, or we're so willing to just like throw the baby out with the bathwater that we don't even know, at the end of the day, why we've engaged in that dialogue in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like when a new idea gets introduced, to your point, it's not like just throw it away just because it's new. Engage it,
yes,
right? But then also understand that the way that things have been, like there's a reason why, and there's a kind of a like an army of witnesses and our history, like our fathers and our grandfathers and their fathers and that did it in a certain way, and it wasn't always exactly the same. I mean, if you go to our LSB, there's whatever your opinions are, there are 5 different services in there, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's different expressions, although they rhyme in a lot of different ways, right? But if you're going to have the conversation, understand that you can take some of those ideas seriously, maybe that are brought to the table. But then make sure you also understand why things have been done the way they are. I think it was Chesterton that said, 2 men walk into a field and they see this fence that's there. And the first guy says, I don't know why this fence is here. Let's tear it down. And the second guy goes, figure out why the fence is here. And then you can figure out whether or not you should tear it down or not.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It should be such a high level of burden to have to go through that process. And I think that effort, like it's too much, right? Like most people don't want to go through that effort. Most people are, excluding themselves from even engaging that from the get-go. And so if you are someone that can like reflect personally and really force yourself to come to terms with like the work that has to be gone through to, actually figure out where that line is, then that's great. But like we have to also understand that for most people in most circumstances, like, are we really doing due justice by that process? The answer is probably no.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a quick break because we've got to order some lunch and make sure we get that in time for you to get back to your kids. And then I want to pick your brain a little bit about higher education.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. And Bennett says we're back again. So the last thing I want to explore, which again, we could do a whole episode on, I'm sure, but you've just come out of higher academia, right? You just got your PhD. How many years ago?
I just finished this summer. So
okay, so this is very fresh.
Yeah, defended my dissertation in June and finished in July.
Is it okay for me to say from where? I mean,
from University of Minnesota. Yep,
yep,
up here in the Twin Cities.
Which is important for this conversation because you've spent time not at like Luther Classical College or at a Concordia. You're teaching at University of St. Thomas, right? Which is kind of cool. But you were able to experience kind of higher academia with the full kind of progressive onslaught, right? And I'm not saying anything about like the individuals that you studied underneath or anything like that, but just the culture that's at public universities today. You had to have kind of just a frontline view of what's going on. So if you can just maybe explain what you see going on, or what are kind of the trends, or what's their philosophy that's leading to some of the changes in higher education that we see?
Yeah, definitely an interesting question. And as you mentioned, I kind of maybe spent my time at higher education thus far, at least, in like various institutions that are a little bit differently than our synodically connected ones or things like that. But yeah, even just a big difference. When I started my PhD program, I went right from my undergrad to my PhD. And so I had kind of this one experience. I graduated, my undergraduate alma mater was Luther College, which is in Decorah, Iowa. That's ELCA affiliated. So I had been there for my undergraduate years, and then going to the big R1 institution, the flagship school of Minnesota, very well renowned for my particular program and a lot of the graduate degrees there and stuff like that. It was just way different in terms of the size, in terms of, what professors were talking about in the classroom, kind of expectations of the conversations that you would have and things like that. And now that I have kind of transitioned back out working elsewhere, it's interesting to kind of look back and understand just maybe what the trends of higher education have been. and how there has definitely been shifts, even thinking of just the differences from like when grandma and grandpa went to the little Lutheran college down the road and things like that. And a few of those that I've kind of identified, first of all, is just obviously the change of population going to college. If anyone is familiar with any part of higher ed, and I know that you've talked a lot about this on the podcast too, is just the changes of students. We are in this massive shift from going from kind of the baby boomer generation going to college to now younger folks. But of course, there's less kids in America. In some cases, there's maybe less kids going to college, depending on affordability and things like this. And so that has changed just who's in the classroom, first of all. Second of all, just like a consideration of how the students going to college are maybe differently prepared for school than what they were in the past, right? So this maybe goes back to a little bit of our conversation earlier, like what have we forgotten, or what do we not know that we don't even know that we don't know? And how is that related to rhetoric or things like being well-spoken or well-articulated? If I have students that come to my classroom that can't even write a paragraph, like that's a problem, because how do they start to even articulate their thoughts in a more full-fledged format, or try to engage with someone in these like deep critical thinking ways that we've been discussing, if they can't even put their thoughts together in a meaningful way? And then finally, I think there's just also been shifts in like ideological positions and kind of the end goal of higher education. So we know that higher ed is kind of meant to serve a specific purpose, right? There's maybe debates on what that specific purpose is. And so this isn't even a difference between Christians and non-Christians necessarily, because of course, Christians would say that we think higher ed should serve a particular purpose of, promoting a certain worldview and moral and virtuous like understanding of the world and of life. But for other folks, there's still an ideology and kind of understanding and perspective that's also trying to be promoted or like utilized as education as a tool to get to this place. And so then all of a sudden you have kind of a buttressing of these different positions in the higher education world, and kind of a competition over who has airtime, right? Who's the professor in the classroom, who is able to present certain evidence in support of their position and things like that. And this is just difficult because then there's not as much emphasis on the topic that's being discussed, or like the discipline as a whole necessarily. It becomes about a completely different side of education than what it necessarily has been in the past.
So it's less of just maybe an exploration of the subject, like something like rhetoric, like what is the art of rhetoric, and it becomes kind of the class becomes kind of a cloak for professors pushing their own ideology.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes that happens, or at least there's been kind of a loss of what the discipline's length and depth and breadth has been too. And so it's maybe not even a professor like being intentional with, the message that they're trying to push or something like that, but just the fact that like in their education, maybe they weren't ever taught about the importance of rhetoric in the scholastic period. Like I know that I've seen this at certain institutions too, where we just don't even talk about Augustine's role in the evolution of rhetoric, or like that certain period of kind of furthering the discipline, even though we would obviously see that as being really significant, but you just don't even have the right people that can talk about that subject or know about like the arguments of God in a way that can teach that to the next generation. And so then all of a sudden it kind of falls to the wayside, and the next people that are going through grad school and becoming educated in that topic just don't have that same knowledge, and then they're perpetuating that in the classes that they're teaching too.
Yeah. Well, maybe two thoughts. One, actually, I looked at when I came out here, I looked at a PhD program at University of Minnesota, just because I was interested when I first came out. I was kind of looking at things before, and I was like, okay, I'm in a new area. Let's see. So I just kind of reached out, and it was, I think it had to do with the kind of the classics, so like kind of the early church, right? That time period. And I kind of gave a little sample of my background, right? Got an MDiv here, and the head just kind of responded. They're like you should check out our page, kind of explaining what we believe. And he knew what he was doing, because I looked at it, and I still have that photo. I should have pulled it up. I've got it saved, but it basically says that our approach is that we have been kind of, they don't use the word brainwashed, but we've been indoctrinated by white, patriarchal, European, Christian values, and that has kind of flooded the educational realm on the study of this subject. So in response to that, we are pushing back with a different narrative, kind of contra-Christian, contra-white, contra-patriarchal, all of that. And I think it was his way of saying, you're probably not going to fit in very well with this program, having an MDiv from a conservative university.
Yeah, no, I think that certainly happens. And, one of the issues there too is then just where does that dialogue or discourse
Right.
take place, right? Back to rhetoric, back to the conversation. And I think that that's maybe the hole that exists in the current environment, if you will, is that there is kind of a lack of back and forth or like an absence of certain perspectives in the classrooms. And I've certainly seen this, right, where Christianity has been outright misrepresented in classes that I've been a part of. But there's no room to even try to push back or like engage or present a different viewpoint. And then, to have a wholehearted conversation about it. It's just kind of dismissal right outright that obviously if you fit into this certain camp, you believe this sort of thing, and putting someone into the box, right? Instead of trying to actually engage with them wholeheartedly, give them the benefit of the doubt, be charitable to the people that you're conversing with, and actually opening the floor for there to be real discourse.
And thank you. That was getting to my point. My point wasn't so much like how offensive is that they don't like Christianity, but rather like if they don't like Christianity, let's work together towards some form of objectivity, and that's where that discussion can take place. And certainly at something like a doctorate's level or a master's level, the students and the professors should be able to embark on that journey to say, okay, so here are the documents from this time period. Or if you're studying rhetoric, like we should take Augustine seriously, and maybe a professor's got some pushback on some things from Augustine for various reasons. But either way, we should be able to look at those and have kind of the academic wherewithal to wrestle with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's kind of the struggle that's currently happening. But again, right, encourages us just why Christians should go into higher education if they feel, called to do so, or they feel like that's a necessarily avenue too, just because if you do have passion for a topic, if you are self-motivated to learn all that there is to know, or, you want to really dive into a particular topic, it's a wonderful way to do it, but you have to do it with those motivations in mind. And I think that's kind of the difficulty of higher ed right now too, is even going to graduate work or whatever. Some of those motivations kind of get obscured, or maybe people go into the field, thinking that it will be good money, or thinking that it will be a well-respected job, or that they will have a platform to be able to teach what they want to teach for the rest of their life. I don't know. Things like that. But then you start to see kind of a weeding away, especially with graduate programs, since there's usually a pretty low retention rate, of the folks that aren't able to kind of make it through based on some of those other ideas, which is just like more motivation to learn or kind of to engage with the material, to actually be in dialogue with these things. And so we should encourage, students that want to go on for their work to be able to get through higher education and be supported in those ways, because how else are we going to produce, professors and those that are willing to engage in kind of this deep thinking?
What's your thought on Christians going into some of those realms and, like you said, kind of tackling some of those subjects like rhetoric, right? It's not, you didn't do like early Christian studies or something like that. Like that's a topic that has kind of a good crossover where it's got a lot of implications in the Christian world, but it also just has implications in just the civil world, right? So what's kind of your pitch or lack thereof for maybe undergrad students or even high school students that are thinking about taking on kind of these higher academic, striving towards these higher academic achievements? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as a Christian, you don't just have to study Christian topics. So I think that that's like maybe a misconception or kind of something that people think about. I even also face the misconception of like, oh, you're a Christian, you're studying rhetoric, like you must just be interested in Cicero, Quintilian, Augustine, because that's like what we teach in our classical schools. And so there's maybe not as much knowledge about even like what rhetoric means right now, or kind of where the field of discipline has gone, because it's obviously gone so much further than like these individuals that are in a certain time or place. But yeah, I would just encourage people to really figure out what that personal interest and motivation is, and, the ways that it might intersect with other parts of their life or other things that they're interested in. And then also, again, remembering that like these are good vocations. They are callings that we should take up and, try to encourage people to go into, just like we should encourage more people to go, more Lutherans to be politicians, right? Or to be engaged in the civic sphere for the exact same reasons. We can't just sit around and complain all the day and say, woe is me, like what a shame that this school, has gone this way, or that you can't get a good education anymore, if we aren't even willing to try to have people be part of those environments or those conversations, which I think is kind of what's happened, is we didn't prioritize or feed into that for so long. And then for the longest time when we were looking at schools or kind of seeing this decline start to happen, we just, felt bad for ourselves instead of actually tried to produce people and students and those that were interested in engaging in these areas of discussion.
If we can, we're kind of running towards the end here. So maybe kind of one last question. You can maybe finish on this, or if you want to use it as a way to kind of summarize. But what should Christian families, right? Why should a child be rightly educated? Why is that so important?
Yeah, I mean, it sets them up for the rest of their life, right? Like with education, we're forming the mind, we're trying to position someone to understand the world in a certain way, to seek after what's good and beautiful and right, and all of these things. And, you know, as those of us that are in charge of children, we are the bestowers of that. We are in charge of creating and curating that environment for them. And therefore, we should be invested in trying to make that as good as possible and not just kind of leaving it to the hands of society or, you know, just letting things go willy-nilly and kind of end up in whatever way they go. No, we should be invested in this and actually trying to make this a good thing, whether it is, you know, the kindergarten that you're sending your 5-year-old to, a middle schooler that's more formative for adolescence, or then, of course, higher education, which so many parents are sending their kids to now as well, but they're not as invested in really ensuring that it's going to be a quality education, that it's trying to further these things, and that it's going to produce, you know, a citizen and Christian that is going to live well in the world and be able to understand and articulate all of these positions and meanings of, you know, what it means to be a Christian and what that identity holds for them.
If you had to kind of pick two markers for particularly parents, or if there's other educators that are listening, kind of like two markers that are essential for, let's pick kind of like that 3rd grade through 8th grade level. Like what are two essentials that we need to make sure we either continue doing or maybe return to doing?
Yeah, I mean, communicating well, thinking well, like that's always what I come back to, right? Because that's the basis for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And this again is why a classical education is so important, because it really like hones in on some of these basic necessary skills and tries to work really hard to further and strengthen them from a very elementary level. But we really need to be able to learn again how to just come together and be in conversation with those around us and be willing to engage in dialogue and discuss the really important issues of life instead of shying away from those things, and to be able to prepare children from the youngest age to be able to do so as well. That way they can be invested, authentic, articulate adults that want to do the same for their kids and the rest of society as well.
Kristen Einertson, thank you. This has been awesome. I am so glad that both you and Christian live I guess an hour away, but this is a great resource for us. And we're waiting for Christian to get his doctorate's degree before we bring him back on. Actually, no, Christian's going to air after this. We are bringing Christian on, yes. And then to bring him again, we're going to wait until he gets his doctorate's
degree.
Degree.
Hopefully he finishes up soon. But thank you so much for having me. This was such a pleasure, and all the best.
All right. Thank you.